All right, good morning to everyone this morning. A couple of minutes late.
I've been looking for you about that correspondence course.
Yes, it'll have to be afterwards. Okay, very good morning to everyone this morning. We are in this classroom, in this class, studying the book of Ezekiel. You want to open your Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 8. That's where we're going to start this morning. Sorry, it's a few minutes late. I was setting up our Zoom meeting and call with Brother Scott this morning in Italy. That's what the camera's for up there, so that he can actually see us, and we'll be able to look that direction and see him up on the big screen. And it never fails. You set everything up, you test everything, and it is perfect. You come in Sunday morning, you just want to turn everything on, and nothing works. So had to do all this reset and everything else, but I anticipated that, so it's part of it. But good to have you with us this morning. We are studying the book of Ezekiel. Mentioned that we do have Scott this morning during our worship service, going to be speaking to us. I do want to say real quick, hello Lola and Winston. It's so good to see you. And it's good to see Laura and Greg with us back there as well. And so it warms my heart to see y'all. I'm so glad to see y'all again. So it's good to see each and every one of you here. So I don't want to make anybody feel like you're not special or anything, but we're glad to have you here with us as well as online. And we've got several things coming up that I want to be sure and bring to your attention. That is our seminar coming up next Sunday. There's some clarification. It's real simple. I think some people are asking about the hours and maybe thinking it was an all-day thing. Well, it's not. It's only Friday night and Saturday night at 7 o'clock. In fact, if you want to come at 6 o'clock, we're going to have fellowship in the fellowship hall and just have a meal together. We're going to have, I think, Jersey Mike's one night. I'm not sure what the other night is. I have to find out. But we're going to have a meal together and then come in, and just for that 1 hour, 7 o'clock Friday night, 7 o'clock Saturday night with Dave Miller talking about must the church change? A lot of things that the church is being attacked about, has been attacked for years, about how it does things. For example, hand clapping, instrumental music, and all kinds of different things that the Church of Christ is always adhered to, but on a regular basis being increasingly more attacked. And so we need to be prepared. And that's the reason why we have this excellent speaker, Dave Miller. If you've never heard him, you're in for a treat. He's an outstanding speaker. And then he'll be speaking for us also Sunday morning and Sunday during our worship service. And so we are going to have everybody in here next Sunday. All of our adult classes, I should say, will be in here next Sunday. In fact, if I can get, let me see if I can, Brother Joe, would you do me a small favor? Would you run down to the young adults class and let them know that next Sunday we will all be in here for the Dave Miller class? Because I don't know that that was clearly announced, and I would just appreciate it. Thank you, sir. All right. Also, I am going to be out of town week after next. Not this next weekend. I'll be here for the seminar. Week after that, I'll be out of town. I'm going to be going back to my alma mater, Southwest School of Biblical Studies, and speaking there at their Arise lectureship that they're having. In fact, Guyton is going to go out there with me, and so we're going to be out there with the brethren out there and have an opportunity to spend some time with them. So I will not be here 2 Sundays from now. So I do need somebody, by the way, to preach on Sunday evening. They can either preach or they want to continue doing this Bible class that we're doing with the books of the Bible. You're welcome to do that as well. So if you have an interest in that, let me know, and I'll also be reaching out to some others. I think that's all my announcements. Sorry that took so long, but let's get into the book of Ezekiel. We are studying this book, and a lot of people look at the book of Ezekiel and get confused and don't understand it. And rightfully so, because there's a lot of poetry and there's a lot of apocalyptic language. And that's where people really get confused. And so I want to give us a quick reminder before we jump into the text of apocalyptic symbolism. This book is very much like the book of Revelation in the fact that it uses all this incredible imagery. The whole purpose of imagery is simply to stick it in your mind. It's shocking. It kind of gets your attention and it stays with you. But the point is, this does have a historical value. This is a prophet speaking to a rebellious nation, and he's talking to them about the punishment that they will be receiving. So don't get lost in the symbolism that's there, the symbol itself, I should say. So whenever you see these strange symbols, look at what it means. Compare that to other similar passages. Thank you, Brother Joe. Appreciate the help. And don't take it literal. It's often interpreted by the inspired writer. He'll explain what he means by it. And so you look for the resemblance of what he's trying to say. And I'm going to point some of those out today. So we are, according to this, in the first half of the book. If you divide this book into two halves, the first half is about God judging His people, judging all nations, really. And then the second half is going to be about God restoring His people. So we're still in this first half, and we're in a little subsection in the middle there, as you see on the screen. We've already studied the grouping of chapters 4 and 5, and then we studied 6 and 7 last week. So we're now in that third grouping, and you'll see it's 4 chapters. It's chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11. And the whole purpose of this section, and they go together, is Jerusalem's sin and judgment. And basically the message is they're being abandoned by God because of their own sinfulness, their own abominations. And we're about to get into that, and I'll explain. But that's so that you understand the book. This is one of the ways of understanding the Old Testament, and especially prophetic books. In my mind, it makes sense to break it down into sections. You know the old phrase, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Well, that's what this is. I'm giving you these bites, these chunks. And so the first chunk was at chapters 1 through 3, which is simply His call and the first vision. And then you have chapters 4 and 5, then chapters 6 and 7, and those being there, the prophecies that were talked about, or dramatized, and then the preaching. And then now we're going to get into why. This is really the why. He said, you're going to be punished. He did these prophecies where he acted out. You remember laying on his side and all that stuff? Well, now he's fixing to tell them why. Why is all this going to happen? And we get into some really strong messages. So let's begin reading chapter 8, beginning in verse 1. And I think in order to really understand what's happening, because it's divided, the chapter's divided up as well into 4 parts. As we're reading, see if you can identify the 4 parts. You're going to see 4 things. All right, so see if while we're reading you can pick these up, and then we'll go back and I'll break down the verses for you. Beginning in chapter 8, verse 1. And it came to pass in the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I sat in my house with the elders of Judah sitting before me, that the hand of the Lord God fell upon me there. Then I looked, and there was a likeness like the appearance of fire, from the appearance of His waist and downward fire, and from His waist and upward like the appearance of brightness, like the color of amber. He stretched out the form of a hand, and took me by a lock of my hair, and the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven, and brought me in visions of God to Jerusalem, to the door of the north gate of the inner court, where the seat of the image of jealousy was, which provokes to jealousy. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel was there, like the vision that I saw in the plain. Then He said to me, Son of man, lift up your eyes now toward the north. So I lifted my eyes toward the north, and there, north of the altar gate, was the image of jealousy in the entrance. Furthermore, He said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing? The great abominations that the house of Israel commits here, to make me go far away from my sanctuary? Now turn again, and you will see greater abominations. So He brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, there was a hole in the wall. Then He said to me, Son of man, dig into the wall. And when I dug into the wall, there was a door. And He said to me, Go in and see the wicked abominations which they are doing there. So I went in and saw, and there every sort of creeping thing, abominable beast, all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed all around on the walls. And there stood before them 70 men of the elders of the house of Israel, and in their midst stood Jaazaniah the son of Shaphan. Each man had a censer in his hand and a thick cloud. That would be the computer audio, I guess, for now. You can mute that. And thick cloud of incense went up. Then he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the room of his idols? For they say, the Lord does not see us, the Lord has forsaken the land. And he said to me, Turn again, and you will see greater abominations that they are doing. So he brought me to the door of the north gate of the Lord's house, and to my dismay, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. Then he said to me, Have you seen this, O son of man? Turn again, you will see greater abominations than these. So he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and there at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, and their backs toward the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, and they were worshiping the sun toward the east. Then he said to me, Have you seen this, O son of man? Is it a trivial thing to the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence. Then they have returned to provoke me to anger. Indeed, they put the branch to their nose. Therefore, I will also act in fury. My eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, I will not hear them. Now I know sometimes we're reading. That's a long read, but for many of us, and have said that you've never really read the book of Ezekiel. You've tried, and so I think it's important to read every verse that we're going to study. At least in this class, we're going to go through the entire book of Ezekiel. And I think it's important. You could break this down and say in this section and explain all the sections, but if we don't ever actually read it, then it's hard to understand what's happening. That's why I think it's important to read. So backing up, there's a lot of weird stuff going on, isn't it? A lot of weird stuff. You're reading this going, man, this is weird. I don't know how you make any sense out of this. Well, this goes back to what I was saying. If you break it down into bite-sized chunks, remember what I said. This is Jerusalem's sin and judgment. This is the why. And this is the result of it, God abandoning them. Now, if you're just joining us for the first time, or if you're a little bit lost, or you need just to be reminded where we are, this is during the time of captivity. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has already been down to Jerusalem twice. Okay? And so this is in between the second and final invasion. The final invasion is when he destroys Jerusalem. He destroys the temple and carries away all of the stuff out of the temple. So there's still people there in Jerusalem. There's people in Babylon that have been carried away captive. But it would be kind of like, I'm trying to think of something that happened in actual history, wartime. I mean, this is actual history, but recent for us. It would be kind of like whenever, let's say World War II. Can we use that? World War II, let's say the Japanese, whenever they invaded the Philippines and they carried a bunch of prisoners away. Well, the Philippines was still its own nation. It wasn't totally under Japanese control yet. And they kept working towards that and taking over more and more islands. That's kind of what we're dealing with here. Nebuchadnezzar is taking over the world. And so he's dealing with all kinds of other nations and stuff, and he's already attacked Jerusalem twice. But he'll eventually get back to finish the job. In other words, completely take care of everything. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, so that's where we are with the historical aspect of it. And that's why when he says, it's really important, these time markers that he gives, when he says the 6th year, the 6th month, and the 5th day of the month. Then I love what's said in verse 1. He says, I sat in my house, and the elders of Judah sitting before me. They've come to recognize this is a true prophet of God, or this is a prophet of God, or there's something about this prophet that's got their attention. They're coming to his house to listen. Man, that's good in some regard. And then it says, the hand of the Lord of God fell upon me. Now that's significant because look in verse 3, he says he stretched out the form of a hand. In between those two verses, notice that he uses the words likeness an appearance. See, that's important whenever you're dealing with apocalyptic literature. The same way in Revelation, uses the word like, appearance, similar to, form of. What does that mean? It's not real. It's a vision. Okay, so it wasn't literally the hand of God reaching out and grabbing Ezekiel by his hair. Okay, it's a vision. Have you ever had weird dreams like that? Have you ever had dreams of something strange happening to you that you look later like, that couldn't happen. So don't take it literal. It's a vision. And that's why he says a vision of God. Now, I mentioned to you about the time frame. This is also the same time frame that Jeremiah is prophesying. Jeremiah is in Jerusalem prophesying these things that are about to happen just like Ezekiel is. So he stretches out and takes his hand, takes him in the vision of God to Jerusalem, to the door of the north gate of the inner court. All right, so Ezekiel's a priest, which means he's what tribe? Levite. And the Levites were priests in the temple. So that would be important to Ezekiel, right? To be able to go to the temple, to be there to do what he's supposed to be doing as a priest. And he takes him to the north gate, north gate of the inner court. Now this is significant also, because if you go, I'm going to use this picture here. If you look at the north gate, let me go to this one real quick. So this is a map of Jerusalem. And look down on the bottom left. You see the little arrow pointing north? All right, so there in the white box, that's the Temple Mount. Okay? And if you come back to this now, this is looking that way. This north gate, I've been trying to work this out in my mind as far as it physically being north or what that is, but according to archaeology, and here's a painting, an artist rendering, you see you see the tall white building, all right? That's the temple. But then to the left, you see those big buildings to the left? That's Solomon's palace. And that one that's the part of the towers, what do they call it? The House of Lebanon, the pillars. There's all this big giant place that had so many columns it looked like a forest. So what we're saying is this is where the king could literally step out of his house right into the temple complex. That's the point of the vision. And this is what he's trying to emphasize, that the supreme leader of the nation of Israel has immediate direct access into the temple court there. Go right into the temple. That's important, right? I mean, what is the significance of that? The significance is you're the leader of God's people. You better be the closest, and you're the one who's going to regulate and watch over all that. Now, I want you to think about the history. Just, you know the Bible, the Old Testament history. Did they do that well? They were really bad at it, weren't they? They were so bad at it that's what he's talking about right here when you get into this next thing that he says. So at this gate where the kings come in, to the door of the north of the inner court, where the seat of the image of jealousy was, which provokes to jealousy. Again, this is one of those things about don't get lost in the symbol. There's a lot of things that this is talking about. In fact, this even has a problem in translation, and I won't bore you with all that information, but there's a problem with how it's translated. And so all these scholars are arguing over what it actually means and stuff. Well, what's the connection? What comes to mind when you think of the image of jealousy? Now remember, the context of this is they're doing bad things. So what would be the image of jealousy? What does that bring to your mind? Say again? Oh, I'm sorry. God, yeah. What does God say about idolatry or images or other gods?
He abhors it.
He abhors it because he's a jealous God, right? And what did he say in the 10 Commandments? What was the first commandment? Thou shalt have...
No other God before me.
Oh, there you go. No other gods before me. And in Scripture, God is described as being a jealous God. Now, let me put a pin down there for 1 second. God is not a human being, okay? He is not actually jealous, because that would be sinful. He's described in human terms, okay? So when it says he provokes to jealousy, and it's this image. All right, I want you to keep your finger here and go with me to 2 Kings 21. 2 Kings 21, verse 7. And look what happens. This is going to kind of clarify a little bit about what possibly Ezekiel is talking about. 2 Kings 21, verse 7. This is during the reign of Manasseh, who was good king, bad king. What was he? You got a 50-50 chance of getting this right. Bad. There you go. He was bad. He was a bad king. This was Josiah's grandfather. Bad king. Terrible. Look what he says. Look what happens in verse 7. He even set a carved image of Asherah that he had made in where? The house of the Lord. Had said to David and Solomon his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I'll put my name forever. See, this house, the temple there, that big white building, that was dedicated to God. That was what David did because he didn't want God living in a tent anymore. In his mind, God shouldn't be in a tent, even though God's the one who designed it, right? The tabernacle. So he builds this. He allows his son to build this temple, and God transfers his glory from that tabernacle into this temple. So that temple represents God's abiding, God's presence among his people. And if that's where God lives, can you imagine taking in an idol after he just said in the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me, taking an idol into his house? Okay? That would be, how many of y'all are Alabama fans? We have no Alabama fans in here? Okay, which fans are you? Which fans? Hook 'em horns. All right, so if we go to your house and you have hook 'em horns everywhere, is it okay to bring in a Texas A&M? But no, exactly not. All right. Oh, Florida State. What am I thinking? Of course, Florida State. You know, that's an abomination in our house because Andrew and Joe are Florida fans, right? So, I know I'm joking around. The point being is just little simple things like that. If you can see how that kind of bristles your hair a little bit, imagine what this is doing to God. All right?
Old Miss go in there, yeah.
Now, what's he talking about? This is what he's talking about, all right? So this is a possibility. This is what was read about in 2 Kings, what Manasseh did with Ashtoreth, okay? Ashtoreth is a goddess of fertility. Well, it's a connection there with the goddess of fertility. And what's really sad is that altar-looking thing you see there on the left, that actually is a mixture of an image of Yahweh, which is forbidden, but an image of Yahweh and an image of Ashtoreth put together. I mean, you couldn't get any worse. It's like, wait a minute, it's one thing to replace him, it's another thing to mix him. All right? And this was a big problem with the idolatry that was taking place in Israel during this time. See, we think in absolutes, like they either worship God or they worshiped idols. No, actually they did both, and they thought it was okay. The same thing happened in Christianity. The same thing happened in New Testament times as well. They were trying to mix things. This was Paul's problem in Corinth. He was trying to get them to understand, no, there's one God, one Savior. And so, and Ephesus as well. So they were mixing things. And so it wasn't as if Manasseh just went in and was going to completely kick God out of his own house and replace him. He just was adding to, which was an abomination. Now, you bring in an idol into the temple, what does he say? That provokes to jealousy.
It defiles it, doesn't it?
It defiles it. It does. Exactly does. And he even says that. All right. So then, you see this horribleness of this idolatry. In the very next verse, he says, and behold the glory of God of Israel. The point of that is to show the contrast, the nastiness of this idol versus the glory and beauty of God. Okay, and then he goes on, and he says, now lift your eyes towards the north. So I lifted my eyes towards the north, and there in the north of the altar gate was the image of jealousy at the entrance. And so what he's using there is he's saying that it's the king, it's man's own fault. The leaders of my people are responsible for this. They're the ones who brought it in. They're the ones who are defiling my temple. Now, he says, do you see what they're doing? Verse 6, very important. Do you see what they're doing? These great abominations. And so that's the 4 parts that I wanted to bring out in this chapter. There's 4 abominations that he's bringing out. The first one is this right here, the idol of jealousy in his temple. Do you see this? Do you see what they're doing? Now, this has been going on for centuries. This is not something that happened just overnight. And then he says something, the main point really of this entire chapter, to make me go away from my sanctuary. It's like, you're supposed to come to my house to worship me. This is my house. The holy place, the Holy of Holies, this entire area is my house. But if you keep coming in and you're not worshiping me and you're bringing in idolatry and stuff like that, it's like, why is he going to stay there? The whole purpose, remember what I said, was him living, being among his people. And so he's saying, I will go far away from my sanctuary. Now, the next part is in verse 7, the hidden idol. So what you're seeing, this is the exterior. This is what you see on the outside. And then he says, Son of man, all right, because look in the door of the court. When I looked, there was a hole in the wall. And he says, dig into the wall. And when I dug into the wall, there was a door. All right, once again, this is the vision. Don't think of this literal. You're thinking, how do you dig in a wall? You know, now I've heard people explain, well, you know, back then they were adobe type houses and you could dig in the side of the other. Okay, that's not the point. The point is, what's the spiritual application? Sometimes you got to dig in a little deeper to get to the heart of the problem, don't you?
Amen.
Sometimes you got to go a little deeper and you got to get on the inside. And that's exactly the point. That's this apocalyptic language is just a vision to give you an example or illustration of what he's doing. It's like, let's go a little deeper inside and see what they're doing. What are they doing? You get inside and he sees painted on the walls every sort of creeping thing, an abominable beast, and all the idols. So this is completely unacceptable or approved by God. You remember God, when he gave the design for the tabernacle, he was very specific about what was to be on the walls. Does anybody remember what it was supposed to be? Huh? Cherubim. That's it. There wasn't anything else. Now remember, we've talked about cherubim before, and we're going to talk about them some more in just a second. Those were holy things. They were not animals of any kind. Because, does anybody remember a nation that worships animals that the Israelites were associated with? Egypt. That all kind of animal culture comes out of Egypt. Now what's happening? You see this room, so he digs in, because you're seeing this from the outside. You see him dig in, and then from there, you see the 70 men or the 70 elders. Is it dropping in and out?
It's blinking.
Okay. I'll take a breath in a second and change out the batteries. He stands before them, the 70 men of the elders of the house of Israel. So what you're seeing here is, back in the secret dark chambers, out of everybody's sight, they're doing some abominable things. So on the outside, it looks like, oh yeah, they're worshiping God, and they're doing all the things they're supposed to be doing for the most part, even though there's idols in the temple. But it gets really bad when you get back in the dark recesses where they think nobody sees them. And just real quick, he mentions this Jezaniah, the son of Shaphan. Does that name ring a bell to anybody that studied their Bible recently, and specifically 2 Kings chapter 22? Hint, hint. Josiah's Secretary of State. Shaphan, the one who was there whenever they found the book. Remember that we did that sermon a few weeks ago about finding the book, as Shaphan was there. This is his son. And so it just shows that even you can get back to doing good and then the descendants can fall away. Look at verse 12. Son of man, have you seen what the elders of Israel do in the dark, every man in the room of his idols? For they say, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. So they think God cannot see them. They think that if we get over here, God won't know what we're doing. But what do we know about God?
All seeing.
He's all seeing, He's all powerful, He's all knowing. He can see everybody every time. In fact, Numbers chapter 32, verse 23 says, your sins will be found out, to paraphrase that. God knows exactly what we're doing at any time. In fact, how did He know to show Ezekiel that? Hey, Ezekiel, go look over here. What does that tell you? God already knew, right? And so He's showing what's happening in the deep, dark recesses, and they think that they can't see Him, and they even utter accusations against God. Oh, well, God's abandoned us. He's left us. No, He hasn't. Just because you are doing things you shouldn't be doing doesn't mean that God has left you, but He will, and that means there is a limit to His patience. All right. So then, that's pretty shocking, don't you think? So there's the second part. The first one was that image of jealousy. The second part is these men, the leaders of Israel, back in this room doing more idolatry. Pretty shocking, right? This phrase keeps coming over and over, and he says, turn again, verse 13, and I will show you greater abominations. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, what a shock. And there's, oh wait, but there's more. There's more. And so, the third one, verse 14. Then he brought me to the door of the north gate of the Lord's house, and to my dismay, women were sitting there. Now just stop right there for a second. Women were sitting there. Where are we? Where are we at? We're in the temple. Okay? Now, do you know much about the law of the temple grounds? I mean, you should pretty know this part, don't you? Are women allowed in that part? Now, before we get, I know in America today, as soon as you say that, oh man, everybody starts flipping out, right? Just a second now. The Bible does not diminish women at all. In fact, it lifts women up. Okay, women are equal when it comes to our souls, when it comes to value and everything else. So that's not what the Bible's saying. But when it comes to roles, God said specifically, remember there's a high priest. Not everybody gets to be the high priest. There are priests. Not everybody gets to be a priest. And then he says men, so not everyone gets to serve on this. So God gives this order. God is a God of order. And if you don't like that, then you're going to really struggle as a Christian. Now, with that order, he says, women are not allowed in this part of the temple. There is a women's court, but they're setting in a place where they're not supposed to be. That shows you how far away they're getting. Now, there's another point that comes to this. And see, when I said a minute ago that women are lifted up, they are important in the Bible, that's because the Bible recognizes that women are the backbone of society. You stop and think about it. What's the old phrase? Behind every good man is a good woman, right? So think about it. If society breaks down and you start looking back up the trail of that, where does it start? All right? Because women are what's the role of a woman according to the Bible? She is, right, the keeper of the household, right? Not head of the household, but keeper of the household. So if the household is breaking down, she's not doing her job, then everything falls down. It's basically you have no foundation, right? Does that make sense? Okay, any comments or anything on that? It might be Facebook. But anyway, all right. Then he says, but they're weeping for Tammuz. Not only are they not where they're supposed to be, but they're weeping for a false god. This is a Babylonian deity that was basically abomination. I mean, this guy is a bad dude. He basically was connected with immorality within worship. I know that sounds weird to us, but this is the same sort of thing that you see all throughout many cultures. You remember Paul had to deal with temple prostitutes, right, in Corinth. That shows you what kind of worship some of these false gods include. A prostitute. I mean, you think, how do you get prostitution and worship together? But this is the kind of abominations we're talking about. Now, the fourth one is beginning of verse 16. So you have the women weeping, and then he says he brought him to the inner court of the Lord's house, and there at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were 25 men with their backs towards the temple of the Lord and their faces towards the east, and they were worshiping what? The sun. Now, all of that's right there is significant with the way that the direction and everything else. It all has to do with Egyptian sun worship. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Ra is the god of the sun in Egyptology. And so this is something that God is trying to get them away from. He even designed the temple to turn his back on the sun, because showing who has power over it. God created the sun, and they're worshiping the creation. And then this little phrase he says in there, let me read verse 17, have you seen this, O son of man? So now the fourth thing he's showing, these abominations. Have you seen this? Is it a trivial thing? This is rhetorical. To the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they commit here? You know the answer. This is horrible. So this is going back to what I was saying. This is the why of why they're going to be punished. God's not punishing them. God's not going to bring destruction upon his holy city just for a whim out of being capricious or anything. He is going to do this because they have committed these abominations. And this idea of they put the branch to their nose. This is some sort of ritual act. And in my mind, this comes back when I lived in Paraguay. There were two trees down there that were just incredible. One of them was called Palo Santo. We still have some of that in our house. They make bowls and all kinds of things out of it. And it's this green wood. It's got this green tone to it. And even years later, you smell that wood and it just has this wonderful smell to it. It just really smells nice. It makes me wonder if maybe that's what this was as part of the ritual, is to smell this wood. Going back, remember what I said about Ashtoreth? Ashtoreth that's how they did it. They were like totem poles. They would build these things up. Even trees. They would make a tree into an Ashtoreth. There would be forests or groves dedicated to Ashtoreth, because this all has to do with fertility. Here, in fact, is archaeology who found an ancient Ashtoreth pole. And this is why here, this is a picture of Gideon, an artist rendering of Gideon ordering all of these idols to be torn down. And so it kind of makes sense that they would put their branch in the nose, bringing it back to this idea of the idol of jealousy. The opposite of doing what was bringing a pleasing aroma to God. Remember, whenever they did their sacrifices the way we were supposed to, it was a pleasing aroma to Him. All right, all of this is rebellion, okay? It is the spiritual disorder that has led to social disorder of chaos and violence and complete and total injustice. So all of this is bad. Now, I had a feeling we weren't going to make it very far. This is 4 chapters. Don't forget that. This is the first part of this entire section of why. And in chapter 8, he shows him these 4 abominations. What's going to happen, and we're out of time, is going into chapter 9, he's going to then show them what the punishment's going to be, how that's going to come about. And there's some really fascinating things in there that connect with Revelation. And so I hope this has helped you understand a little bit more about this section of Ezekiel. Any questions or comments